This is part 2 of our Views and Workflow webinar for DDX. Our objectives for this session were to give you some background and building blocks as relates to how to create views and how to set up simple workflows with DDX. What were the purpose of views and document types and underlying database, etc. all was covered in our first session. This session is devoted to creating your view. We'll talk a little bit about the preparation and organization, how you look at document types and identify logical groups of documents that you want to put together in a view. We'll show you how to create a new view and test the view. We'll also talk about advanced topics of injecting SQL code as well as creating simple workflow views. Let's start by preparing to create a view. A lot of this you can do with a piece of paper and a pencil, or I find that an Excel spreadsheet works really nicely for a lot of this. First, target your audience, figure out what document types they need to be able to see and what is going to be the best order or hierarchy for them to see them in terms of folders and such. Identify the logical groups of documents that apply to that audience and sketch out your tree view or your folder hierarchy as you go. Lay out the details then. What types of documents? Maybe you need to create some new document types if that's necessary. Ask yourself what keywords are available, and you can do a little research into your existing system to figure out which keywords apply to which documents. And then what keywords do they share? If you're going to be grouping them together, it's very handy, for example, to have the order number, customer order number, on each of the documents related to a customer order. That makes pulling them together far, far easier than if that's not the case, as we saw earlier in session 1. Then create your view and test the view. To do all of this, let's look again at the DDX database. Number one, you want to determine what those logical groupings may be, okay, and then evaluate the other documents that might fall into that group, and then create your new document type if that's what you need to do to match all the critical keywords together with the other document types. As we can see from the matrix on the screen here, at the left we've got the internal DDX database fields, those columns that you will find in DDX's main table. And then at the right, we've got 3 different document types listed, each of which we've kind of mapped or drawn the matrix to show where information is stored within DDX. And we can see, maybe I want to add a new document type called a certification over at the right. If I've already got a couple customer-focused documents like the invoice and acknowledgement in my system, it's in my best interest to try and use the patterns already established there when I'm creating this new document type for certification. And we can see that there are some differences, things like the document ID. Those are different, typically the unique identifier for any individual kind of document, but they're different for each type of document. It's an invoice number for an invoice, an order number for an order, and maybe for my new certification it would be a cert or certification number. The same is true of the document date. It represents something a little bit different and might be described in a different way when the user goes to look at them. But they share a lot of things in common. So if that's the case, it's to my advantage to keep that common information in the same internal bucket. For example, customer name is always I've kept in lookup 1. Customer number I've kept in lookup 2. Customer PO number in lookup 3, and customer 4 contains my customer order number. That is going to come in very handy when we try to construct a view or a folder hierarchy that's aimed at showing me things by customer name, then by customer order, and then all the different document types for that particular customer order. And we'll see how that all ties together in a little bit. Once you've created your document type, then you're going to create the view. The first screen when you create a view is kind of an overview. It lets you put in a little bit of help text, and you can add additional SQL code here to provide additional criteria trying to determine what document types or documents themselves are going to display when users go to use this view. Then we'll look at security and how security is set up. Within a view, you can select to show all divisions and all document types. It's very simple, one little simple click. Or you can select specific divisions that you want to be shown in this view. And once you've done that, selected a specific division, one or more, within any one of those divisions, you can select to show all document types within that division, or you can select only certain document types that you wish to display there. This allows you individual control then over whether someone can publish documents using this view, whether they can add, change, or delete notes at a document type level. So when we mentioned earlier in the session 1 that both divisions and document types had some special meaning within DDX, it really applies to this security function here. Then the last thing you'll do when you're creating a view is you'll add what's called tree nodes. Really, these are the folders and the hierarchy of folders that will be displayed when the user goes to the DDX document viewer. The first item in the list generally is something you want to keep a very small list of. I typically choose division as the top level. That way when somebody's opening the viewer, they're not simultaneously trying to display a very long list of folders. Generally, your list of divisions is relatively short. The last thing on the list should always be page number. Neither of these two rules are hard and fast requirements, but they're generally good practice. Whatever appears as the last node in your list of trees or your hierarchy becomes the tabs that you see across the bottom in the document viewer. So it makes logical sense in most practices to put the division as the first highest level in the hierarchy and the page number as the last thing in that hierarchy. Then when you're all done setting up your view, test it. You're going to go into the document viewer, make sure that you can see it. If you make changes to the definition of the view, you just need to refresh your view in the document viewer. It reloads that entire schema, complete with any changes you may have made without having to exit the viewer. So you can use the refresh option from the viewer view menu or hit the F5 key and it will accomplish the same thing. With the publisher, there is no refresh option available, so you need to exit the publisher and relaunch it in order to pick up any new changes or modifications you may have made in the DDX Administrator. So let's show you what we're talking about. Now I'm going to presume you've done your homework already. You've identified your users and what they want to see and the types of documents and everything else. And maybe you've even gone to the extent of identifying the specific document types that you need to collect together in your view. If you haven't gotten that far yet, just a quick hint, looking at the DDX Administrator that you see on your screen at the moment, when I open up the document types, I see a list of all the major document types that are here. And if I open one of these up, I can see all the keyword fields that are available to me or defined overtly anyways for this specific kind of document. So if I choose something like customer name, I can see here that the internal database column that I want to look at to show a customer name is lookup 1. This is going to be necessary when I get into defining that folder hierarchy that we saw earlier. I also need to know, for example, that if I look at customer number, it's in lookup 2. Now, if I go to a document type and I find for some reason that that document type does not include a list of overtly defined keywords, like I just clicked on the picking ticket here and nothing opened up, that means that it's going to inherit all of its keywords from that reserved special document type that we talked about in session 1 called the default document type. So in the case of the picking ticket, where there are no overtly defined keyword fields, I can look to the default document type to find out what I need to know about this particular document and the keywords that are associated with it. In the case of the picking ticket, it will have a keyword called cust/vend name, and that information will be stored in lookup 1. Now to create a new view, I go to the View section, and I right-click, and I say Add a View. And I'm going to give it a name. This name is what's going to appear in the drop-down list in both the viewer and the publisher, so that users will see this to select the view that they want to see. I can easily allow all divisions and all document types here, which means basically there is no security. And I can provide a little help text here. This is my new view that is visible to users of the viewer if they hover over the name. So if you want to share a little bit of information with them, you can put that here. Down below, used by groups will show me the groups in which this view is allowed if you have security turned on and you are using groups. And down below that, if you have additional criteria that you want to add to this view to whittle down the list of documents that are shown, you can add that criteria here and it gets appended to the SQL where clause. So this is a way to narrow things down, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. When I open up my new view here, I can see I've got two other nodes here, security and tree nodes. Now in the case of this particular view, I've selected to show all divisions and all document types, so security really doesn't come into play. If I uncheck this, I would go into the security level then and say I want to add a division that's going to be accessible through this new view. And I'm going to just choose my MDL division. Now I could allow all the document types in this MDL division, and if that's all I did, the users of this new view would be able to see any kind of document type that is in the MDL division. With it unchecked, I can select individual document types like customer PO, order acknowledgement, and maybe the invoice. And then they are only going to be allowed to see acknowledgements, customer POs, and invoices within the MDL division. Now I could add additional divisions here, and for each division I get to select the specific kinds of documents that they have at their disposal. When I've done this at this level, I can select an individual kind of a document, like for example my customer PO, and over at the right I can choose some options related to it. So people looking at the system through this particular view can be shown only the current revisions of customer POs in this case, or all. We can allow publishing, meaning this will show up as an option in the publisher or not, depending on how I've selected these things. And I can control what people can do with notes in the DDX viewer. I can allow them to view them, add them, change them, delete them, so on and so forth. So I can make these settings apply only to the customer PO and a different set of settings to the order acknowledgement. Now in this case, maybe I expect to get my order acknowledgement directly from my ERP system, whereas so I don't want people publishing them. But in the case of the customer PO, I expect to get it from my customer. They're going to have to use the publisher to put it into DDX. So I do want to allow that here. This allows me some granularity of control. Now, if I were to add another division here, like my ABC division, I could simply say, show me everything in that division. And these same settings you see over here at the right, they will apply to every document type within the ABC division. So here I'm going to allow users to do everything. So this is the major way that you will control what people can see when they have access to this particular view. The next step is for me to assign tree nodes. And again, this is really the assignment of the hierarchy of folders that you will see. To do that, I'm going to add a node on the tree. And you'll notice that it says it's asking for column SQL code. And that's because what you're really putting into this field here is SQL code. Now that may just be a field name or a column name within DDX. And if it is, I erase what we saw there, and I can right click and go to the fields list and just choose off of the list of fields that are available in the DDX main table. This is where all your keywords are stored. Now, I mentioned earlier it's a good idea to put division as the first thing on the list, so I'm going to choose that. And I don't need to put any little prefix in front of it, although I could put the word div : and when they look at it in the document viewer, they'll see div : and then the actual division code. The sequence order determines the order in which these things will be displayed. So this is how you set the hierarchy. For division, because I always want it to be the first thing, I could set it to sequence 1 or 0, and that'll accomplish that. I also mentioned earlier that it's probably good practice to put the page number as the last thing. So my habit is to add another tree node right away. I'm going to make this right-click and say page number. And I'm going to make this number 99 on my list so it falls in the last. And I want it to say page colon in front of it. By default, it will sort in ascending order, but I can change that here. So if I close this up again, I can see these things in order. And now I can go through and add some other nodes to this tree and develop the hierarchy that I want to see. If I add a tree node here, and I'm going to keep this pretty simple, I know that in lookup 1, that's where all my customer names are. So I want to see this sort by division. Then I want to see customer name on the next level. And I'm going to make this sequence order number 10. I usually space these out a little bit by 10s just so I can insert something without having to renumber the whole batch. Now I'm going to go add another node here, and I know that the next thing I want to see is the customer order number. And I know that that is in lookup 4. So I'm going to make that 20. And I also know that I want to see the document type, maybe next. So I'm going to select the fields and select doc type. I'm going to make that 30 on my list. And then lastly, I'm going to go use the doc ID. I could just type this in if I know these names as well. Doc ID is going to be 40. Now, generally, good practice is to use the doc ID as kind of a unique identifier for a document. For example, with an invoice, the doc ID would typically be invoice number. With an order acknowledgement, the doc ID would typically be my customer order number. With a customer PO, it would typically be their PO number, and so on and so forth. That allows me then to make this hierarchy go from very general to more specific to more specific to more specific. So if I shrink this back up again, it rebuilds this list in the order that I wish to see them, with the division at the top, customer name, customer order number, document type, document ID, and page number. Now, I mentioned earlier in session 1 that the document type is a little bit different kind of a field, and it is. It is stored as a number internally to DDX, but when displayed to the user through the document viewer, what they see is the description of that document type rather than that internal number. So when I go to look at this view, I'm going to wind up seeing it in such a way that I am looking at the description of a document type rather than the actual document type itself. Now, with the DDX Administrator, none of the changes that you make are saved or effective until I actually go through a save process. Just like Microsoft Word, I make a change to a document, it doesn't take effect until I save it. The same is true with the DDX Administrator. So I'm going to save my changes and click OK. I'm going to flip over to my viewer because I want to see the results of what I just did. But I had previously launched the viewer, and when I launch it, it reads that schema and all the views and everything else and loads it into my computer's memory and works from there. So at the moment, this instance of the viewer doesn't know anything about that new view that I just created. But I can fix that very easily. I could either exit the viewer and launch it again, or in the viewer, I have the opportunity just to refresh my view, which refreshes that entire schema as well. So if I do that, now when I open this list up, I see my new view showing up on my list. When I open it up, I see only things from one division because there is nothing available to me in the ABC division. In my database, I have no documents there. But now I'm seeing things by customer name, by order number, and now here's the 3 kinds of documents that I have at my disposal: acknowledgement, customer PO, and invoice. We've created that folder hierarchy using the tree views. If I shrink these up and look at the administrator over here, these tree nodes determine what this hierarchy is going to be. First level is division, second level is lookup 1, then lookup 4, then document type, then document ID, And when I click on the last thing, we see the page number down here. That's the last thing in my hierarchy. The same is true in my DDX publisher, but now the publisher doesn't have a refresh option, so if I was running it, I need to exit it and re-enter it. But when I open it up and I select the appropriate view here, we'll see now my new view is listed here, and I've only got a couple choices for division, MDL, and ABC. And when I go to the MDL division, I have limited myself to being able to publish only customer POs because of the way that we had set our security up here in the administrator. The customer PO allows publishing, therefore it appears on the list, but the order acknowledgement does not allow publishing, and neither does the invoice. So we've been able to create a view very simply and easily using the administrator to create that hierarchy of folders that we'll see and to limit what I can see when somebody is using that particular view. Let's tackle some more advanced topics and show you how workflow is accomplished with DDX as well. The view also allows me to inject SQL code. So if you're fluent in SQL, you have an opportunity to really make DDX sit up and sing and do the kinds of things you want to do in terms of showing an individual or showing a user the types of things that you wish to see, and make that very flexible. Now, our objective here today is not to teach you SQL, but to give you an idea of what is possible if you already know SQL. There are many sources on the internet and elsewhere to learn SQL and how it works and syntax and everything else. But our objective here is to show you how it works with DDX. The uses here are for creating things like workflow, for matching documents one with the next, for setting up custom tree nodes because you can inject SQL there as well. It uses standard Microsoft SQL code, TSQL. So if you think of a DDX view as a SQL statement that returns a series of rows, that's exactly what it's doing here. You can inject additional SQL code to add selection criteria, so it becomes part of the where clause in that statement, and you can manipulate tree node or folder level data as well by using SQL functions or functions of your own making to manipulate it to show what you want to show there. You can use DDX internal data for this manipulation or external data, as long as that external data is available from the SQL server on which DDX resides. There are samples in standard DDX distribution that you can take a look at. There's a sample workflow and a sample date manipulation and so on and so forth that might give you something to look at to get you started. A warning here, with injecting SQL, you're capable of creating views that will break DDX. In effect, illegal SQL syntax will break the publisher or the viewer. So you should test carefully, in particular when you're using your own SQL code here. A quick little sample just to show you one way that SQL can be used on a tree node or tree level looks like this. In the document viewer, if I select the year, month, name view, for example, we find that when I open this up, I see a year listed, then a month, then a date, and so on and so forth down the way. Well, we've accomplished this by looking at the document date for each of these documents and just using a simple little SQL function to develop this particular level in the trees. To look at that same thing in the DDX Administrator and show you what's going on behind the scenes, I'm going to open up the year, month, day and look at the view, and we can see that the SQL code here for this particular level in the tree uses the SQL function year. And then we're just picking the year out of the doc date column. So that's one way of injecting SQL in your system. Another way of looking at how SQL might work in your system is thinking of it in terms of workflow. So let's first define workflow in DDX. What we mean when we say workflow is that we wish to display a collection of documents that are in a particular state. That means go out to this big pool of documents and perform some selection process that winnows that list down to just the things that I want to see in this particular DDX view. Now, the way state is defined can happen in various ways. In essence, checking the state of a document means injecting some SQL into a DDX view to perform some more complex selection. One of the ways that that occurs is a sample in your system. If we look at the workflow approval queue, in my case, we see just a couple things: vendor invoices that need to be sent along their way. Well, the reason that these few documents appear in this particular view is because of the way this view is set up in DDX using some injected SQL as criteria. If I look at the AP approval queue, I can see I've got a name for that view and a little bit of help text, but I've got some SQL criteria code in here. And this particular code is saying that in addition to the security code, where I might be looking at only certain divisions and certain document types that would have been set up here, I want to also apply this little SQL statement to the where clause as I'm going out gathering documents and choosing what to display to the end user. In this case, this is a simple little where clause that's checking DDX's note table, looking at the most current note, right, by date, time changed, descending, looking at only one, and it's saying if I found any of them in there where the priority code is equal to 2, then display it. If not, don't display it. Hence, we get a very, very short little list here. This is a relatively simple approach to dealing with workflow. It's one that a lot of our customers use, where they use the notes as a means of signing off on things. But by no means the only thing that you can do by injecting SQL here. Whatever you do here needs to be legal SQL code in the context of a SQL group selection. So you need to ensure that that's the case, and when you've done it, go in and test it, make sure that it works for the viewer. If it is broken or invalid SQL syntax at some point along the way, you won't be told until you attempt to use it in the viewer. So our caution there. So let's recap what we've learned so far about DDX and views and workflow. We went in session 1 through a bunch of background information and exposed you to some of the building blocks and concepts: purpose of DDX views, document types, the underlying database, how it's laid out, some special fields there, and some of the tools that were involved in this entire process: the administrator, the viewer, and the publisher. In this session, we went through actually creating your view, how to prepare for it and organize yourself so that you know what document types you're going to be dealing with, how to identify logical groups of document types, and if you were to be setting up new document types, how to tie those into things that may already exist. Then we walked you through how to create a new view and test that view, and we talked a little bit about injecting SQL for additional complex selection and how to use that technique for creating workflow views in DDX. So all the headaches that DDX is there to help you solve: trapped documents, things that are at risk, eliminating all the busy work and all the waste that comes with all of those things above. All those things are taken care of by DDX, and you can tailor it to work the way that you want to work. Now, if you need some help, we're here to help with additional consulting, additional training, either one-on-one through the university or videos like these ones. And we're here to help with customizations. We can customize DDX to do special things that you may need. We can deal with ERP integration. So if you need it to tie back into your existing business systems, let us know. We can help there. We can set up and create workflows for you as well. We're here to help you using DDX as your document management system. Thanks for attending. If you've got any additional questions, don't hesitate to give us a call.